Good afternoon, good evening, FBC family, and also Temple of Sinai family. Today we have a special treat for our Wednesday night study. We have none other than Rabbi Michael White here today with a special guest. He will be leading the study today. So stay tuned. Let's get excited. I spoke to him and he said he wants to hear the comments. He wants to know what you're thinking. He wants to hear ideas. If you have questions, he would love to hear it. So please text in the chat. You could comment any questions and we'll get to it and we'll put it on the screen so you can see it and he will get to your comments. So the next voice you will hear is none other than Rabbi Michael White.
Hi, everyone. It's really a delight to be with you. Victor and I were talking that the last time we did this, of course, Victor Sr., my dear friend, and I conducted this session together at the church just before the pandemic began. And of course, so much has happened since then. I am certainly grateful to be with all of you, although I wish we could be in person. I wish I could see your faces and would be able to engage with you and hug you the way we always do. But it's great to be with you in any case, and certainly in this forum. And I just have a feeling that my friend Pastor Lewis is watching down and smiling at this. And I know he's very proud of his son, Victor, who told me tonight that he's training to be a deacon. I just think that that's so wonderful. And it's just wonderful to be back with him and with Victor's family and with Victor's church family as well. I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes or so, and then I'm looking forward to seeing your comments and questions. Those for me are where the real learning takes place in our engagement with each other. So please feel free to ask anything at all. I'm going to share my screen right now so you can see you can see the texts that we're going to be discussing tonight. Hold on one second. Let's see. We can do that. Yes, we can. And here they come. Good. So for those of you from Friendship Baptist, in the Jewish tradition, Jews read a section from the Torah chronologically from beginning to end every week. Every single week, all Jews in all synagogues all over the world read the same section of Torah. Now, where we are now in our reading of the Torah is that we are leaving Egypt. We have been liberated. We are finally free, and we will sing a song of liberation this week because freedom has finally come after 430 years of servitude in Egypt. We are now free. Now, before we get to the section from this week, I want us to back into it by talking about the first time that Moses and God encounter each other in the desert. And as a prelude to that, I want to offer a couple of reflections. One way to look at this story and to look at the Hebrew Bible is to say that God's dreams for humanity are mediated through human hands and through human action. That God created humanity with the capacity for great goodness, for creating great blessing. And God also, through the sacred texts that we all have, God gave us the image of what the world we are to create should look like. What divine aspirations for this world are for justice and compassion and dignity, human dignity, the elevation of human dignity, for human decency, for generosity, for creating a world wherein all human beings matter to each other, where we respect each other and respect the world around us. So those are the aspirations that God created for us. And God created us with the capacity to achieve those aspirations. And God gave us the religious texts that teach us what they are and how to get there. But here is the challenge. Those same instincts that can bring about the flourishing of this world also can become very, very dark. They also can lead to sin and to failure and to human beings brutalizing each other, to divisiveness and to deceit. The same impulses that bring us to great goodness can also lead us astray. And one could look at the Hebrew Bible, especially the beginning of it, as a litany of examples of all of the times that we failed, right? So Adam and Eve in the garden, right? Adam and Eve eating the apple. What is that? Well, it's about a desire for knowledge. It's about curiosity. Two very important impulses gone wrong. And then, of course, we have Cain and Abel, the first murder, where you have the impulse for wanting to succeed and achieve and to please God gone terribly wrong. And then we have Noah and the flood, and then we have Sodom and Gomorrah. All of these examples which demonstrate that for all of God's desires for us, ultimately the achievement of them is in our hands. Now, again, just to reiterate and to capture how we achieve the world God wanted for us, I would say there are three factors that lead to success when we actually create moments that God would dream for us, and when we become the people God dreams we become. The first is a humble recognition that all that we see and all that we enjoy and all that blesses us is God's gift to us. That there is a sacred ground on which we walk, that we are created by God in the divine image for greatness, but that we have to recognize that, and we have to acknowledge it and give humble gratitude for it. Second, that inside of each of us is a voice compelling us to great goodness, and that we have to listen to it, and we have to understand that that voice, the voice of human conscience, is God's gift to us. It's two. And three, we have to have the discipline and the resiliency in order to act according to our traditions and to fulfill the obligations that God has given to each of us. So that's the backdrop that I want to use to read some of these texts with you. So first, as I mentioned, we have before us the first encounter between Moses and God. Now, the story, just the backdrop of this story, of course, is that Moses was raised by Pharaoh's daughter as Egyptian royalty in the midst of the enslavement of his people, because Moses is an Israelite. And the Israelites are brutally enslaved by the Egyptians. And he has this one moment of recognition when he sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating an Israelite slave and takes it upon himself to murder that Egyptian taskmaster. And then he flees into the desert to Midian, where he builds a life for himself. He marries, and he becomes a shepherd under the domain of his father-in-law Jethro, and that's where this moment happens. This amazing moment. So what does it say? Moses was tending to the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, drove the flock into the wilderness, and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire out of the bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, "I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up?" When God saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses answered him, "Here I am." And God said, "Do not come closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy God. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And God continued, "I have marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, and have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I am mindful of their sufferings. I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt?" Okay, so this is the first text. I'm stopping the share now. So hold on. Let me just get back to you. There we are. So this is a brief paragraph in which so much is taught to us. So first, the notion of a bush that is aflame but not burning. How do you know that a bush is aflame but not burning? Now, this is the middle of a hot desert day. The sun is blazing. So to see a bush on fire would, I assume, be a rather normal experience, given the heat. You know, in the southern desert of Israel, by 10 o'clock in the morning in the summer, it can be 120 degrees out. So a relatively normal experience to see a bush on fire. In order to notice that this bush was a miracle, you have to be open to the possibility of miracles. In order to see that this bush was extraordinary and a sign, you have to be open to the possibility of divine signs. Now, we Jews, we read the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, through the prism of rabbinic commentary, which is just as sacred to us as the words of the Bible themselves. And in the rabbinic tradition, we read that that burning bush was created on the fourth day of the creation of the world. It had always been there, always. And during all those years of slavery, it was there. And notice what the text says. First, Moses says, "This bush is unusual. I must turn aside and look at it and see how unusual it is and see what it means." And then the text says, "When God saw that Moses noticed the bush, God spoke and said, 'I am the God of your fathers.'" The chronology is important. Moses was the first person. Who knows how many tribes, how many caravans had gone past that bush and nobody noticed it. Moses had to notice the bush in order for God to recognize him as his emissary to Egypt to free the Jews. So you have to be open to the possibility of divine miracles. You have to be open to the possibility of the reality of the sacred in this world. So that's how the story begins. And I wanted to share that with you again to reinforce this notion that God's will is mediated through human action. We have to be God's hands. We have to be God's emissaries in order to bring goodness and decency into the world. Now, I want to share from this week's portion. So I'm going to share again. Share screen. Hold on. Sorry. My computer's not letting me do it. There we go. Share screen. Come on. You let me do it once. Let me do it again. Let me try this. Share screen. There we go. Okay. And go to the window. There we go. Here it comes. Okay. So now we get to this week. So the people, so now you all know the story, right? Moses goes to Pharaoh And there is this increasing destruction through the 10 plagues that God brings upon Egypt because Pharaoh refuses to let the people go. And then we get to this point where finally, after the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn of Egypt, we get here to Exodus chapter 14. Now, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer, for God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people roundabout by way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. The Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and a pillar of fire by night to lead them, to give them light, that they may travel day and night. So lots of signs of divine determination in the freedom of the Israelites, right? But God recognizes, after all the litany of the moments that I've shared with you, from Adam and Eve to Cain and Abel, right? People have to be ready to accept the burden and the blessing of freedom. And God recognizes that the Israelites are not there. So a 2-day walk becomes a 40-year walk because they're not ready yet. And how do we know that? Well, because in the midst of this rapid exodus from Egypt, Pharaoh changes his mind and starts chasing them. And so what happens next? And they said to Moses, was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to the wilderness, to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Isn't this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians, for it is better for us to serve the Egyptians, for us to die in the wilderness. So at the first sight of trouble, the people turn on Moses and want to go back. They want to go back into slavery because slavery was known, slavery was structured, and because they even romanticize the brutality of it. But Moses said to the people, have no fear, stand by and witness the deliverance which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. God will battle for you. You will hold their peace. I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his warriors, his chariots, his horsemen. And the Egyptians know that I am Adonai. So Moses, very firm, very, very confident when speaking to the people. But then we have this wonderful passage here, which I've italicized. Then God said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward, and you lift your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it, so the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. So this line here, why do you cry out to me? It seems out of place. But what we sense is that although Moses was very confident on the outside, on the inside, he was just as terrified. And so the imagery is he must have turned and prayed, and God responded by saying, what are you praying for? Do something. It's time for action. God's will is mediated through human action. Moses's action is necessary here, absolutely necessary. And all of the words of a triumphant God are important. But we Jews talk about what is called in Hebrew shutafim, partners, that humanity and divine are partners in affecting blessing and sacred power in this world. And it can only happen when humanity and God share that responsibility. Okay, so I'm wondering, are there any questions? Let's see. God helps those who help themselves. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to continue on a little more, but then I'm going to ask for your questions. So think of questions, but I'm going to go on and just do a little bit more of the text here. I'm sharing. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Okay. So now the imagery is that, and you've all seen this represented in so many wonderful movies. There's so many wonderful ones. I think The Prince of Egypt is just magnificent in this moment. And so the Israelites, as it says here, they march into the sea on dry ground, and they march through the sea. And then, of course, at the end, when they get to the other side of the sea, the Egyptian army comes in, the sea closes in, and the Israelites are finally free because the Egyptian army has been vanquished. And then this is the power of music and of poetry in the Bible. And so this is the song that Moses and the Israelites sing. I will sing to God, for God has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver God has hurled into the sea. God is my strength and my might. He has become my deliverance. This is my God, and I will enshrine him. And this next section, we Jews sing in every one of our worship services. Who is like you, Adonai, among all the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, doing wonders? So it is a song of triumph, a song of deliverance, a song of glory and of strength, a song of empowerment and of liberation and of relief, a song of absolute relief. For decades, Jews in the Soviet Union were denied the ability to study Torah, to celebrate, and they were denied the ability to leave the former Soviet Union. And when one of the most famous Soviet Jews, who had been imprisoned for his activity as a Jew, both mobilizing the Jewish community to protest these laws and teaching Torah and teaching Judaism to the Jews of Moscow. He was imprisoned for that. When he was released and he was finally freed and got to Israel, this is what he sang. He sang this song. But I want to share with you one modern interpretation of this text that I particularly love. And before we get to it, I just want to say that a lot of the complaining that you saw in the very first moments of liberation, didn't we tell you not to take us out of Egypt? Didn't we tell you that this would happen? We want to go back. We want to go back. We'll be slaves to them. We see that throughout the wanderings. God was right. The people were not ready. And so we see that kind of complaining over and over and over again. And so one modern author, Rabbi Larry Kushner, gave a voice to it with this. He said, after the sea parted and our ancestors entered, saved by God, on their way to freedom, the bottom of the sea was a little muddy. One Jew named Reuben stepped into the mud and curled his lip. What is this muck? Another named Shimon scowled. There is mud all over the place. This is just like the slime pits of Egypt. What's the difference? Complained Reuben. Mud here, mud there. It's all the same. And so it went for the two of them, grumbling all the way across the bottom of the sea. And because they never once looked up, they never understood why on a distant shore everyone else was singing songs of gratitude. For Reuben and Shimon, the miracle never happened, right? It's like the burning bush. It's just a bush unless you notice that is a miracle. And for Reuben and Shimon, this was just mud. It was just mud. It was just mud. We have to be open to the possibility of the divine presence in our lives in order for the divine presence to be in our lives. And just one more episode here. So this story is told again 20 chapters later. And when it's told again briefly, we get the episode of the golden calf. We don't get it when it's told this time, but we get it when it's told next time. And this is another example of how the people strayed, how human action and human behavior can thwart God's best and most impressive plans for God's people and for humanity. So what does it say? When the people saw that Moses was so long coming down from the mountain, this is when Moses went up to the top of Mount Sinai to get the 10 commandments. The people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that man Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." And Aaron said to them, "Take off your gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me." So a moment of fear, a moment of unclarity. Moses is on the mountain. He's still up there. Is he coming down? What do? After seeing all of these miracles, after having been walked through the Red Sea on dry land, after having seen the pillar of fire, after having seen the clouds of glory, they become afraid and they become idol worshipers in that moment. And so the blessing here is the recognition that we have the capacity to overcome those urges that result from fear, but it's in our hands. God gave us the capacity, us the choice to act for holiness or to act for darkness. And I just want to share with you one reading from the book of Psalms that is associated with the crossing of the Red Sea and with the Exodus from Egypt. And for me, it's one of my favorite Psalms. And so that's why I want to conclude with this, and then we'll get to some of your questions. Some of you I know this. It's breathtakingly inspiring and beautiful and nourishing. God is our refuge and stronghold, a help in trouble, very near. Therefore, we are not afraid, though the earth reels, though the mountains tumble into the sea, its waters rage and foam, and its swell mountains quake. There is a river whose streams gladden God's city, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. God is in its midst. It will not be toppled. By daybreak, God will come to its aid. Nations rage, kingdoms topple. At the sound of God's thunder, the earth dissolves. The eternal God of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our haven, Selah. So whether it is natural catastrophes that are inexplicable and horrifying, or it is the rage of the human heart that causes war and causes violence and causes hatred, God is with us to help us overcome them. This is the range of the challenge to faith, whether it's natural catastrophes or whether it is human failure. They challenge faith. And this psalm reminds us, God is our haven. God is with us. Our only responsibility is to see it, is to know it, is to be open to the possibility of the sacred in our lives and in our world. It is to see the bush as a miracle. It is to look up when we are walking through the sea and to see it as a miracle. When you see that life is infused with sacred, that there is a power, a determinative power that gave life to us and to all we see, then you become open to the power, the wellspring of faith, and to its guidance and to its strength in the hardest times. So with that, I will stop. And please share your questions. Okay. If Moses was the one to notice the burning bush, why do you think he continued to be fearful? because he was a human being. I think that great human beings, that courageous leaders, inspiring leaders, those who have the gift to inspire others, I think if they're not afraid, if they're not aware of their own limitations, if they don't see clear-eyed at the challenges they face, and if those challenges don't occasionally terrify them, well, then they become Machiavellian. Then they no longer can help us because they will actually lead us off a cliff. So I think it's actually a sign of Moses's humanity and greatness that there were moments of fear and moments of weakness for him. And also I would say, there's a moment, there are moments like with the golden calf, right? To paraphrase, God says, I'm just going to wipe everybody out. I'm going to kill everybody, God says. And you and I, Moses, will start over. And Moses challenges God and convinces God not to do that and saves our people. You have to have a certain degree of humility. You have to have self-knowledge and self-awareness about when to do that and when not to do that and how to do that in order to be effective in doing that. Okay, next question. Alana, good. Did God harden Pharaoh's heart, or did Pharaoh's sin cause his heart to harden on its own? I just taught this to my own congregation last week. So at the beginning of the story, God says two things. God begins by saying, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And then it says just a few verses later, and Pharaoh's heart will harden, and he will be stubborn. And the rabbis of the Jewish tradition, they notice that. They notice that one is active. God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And the second is passive. Pharaoh's heart hardened. And they look at that and they say, this is how human beings condition themselves. So first, as I said, what is the first part of that phrase? What does the first phrase mean? I will harden Pharaoh's heart. So the rabbis say what it means is that God gave us the capacity to choose whether to soften our hearts, whether to crack open our hearts, whether to allow our hearts to be expansive and warm and full of compassion, or to harden them. God is the ultimate source of our capacity to choose. God gave us our capacity to choose. And if we continue to reinforce bad behavior, to enable it, and to do it over and over again, we coarsen our hearts, and therefore we actually limit our capacity to make those choices. And that's what Pharaoh did. So God is the ultimate source of the choice to become stubborn or to become open-minded and expansive and generous. But ultimately, we make those choices. And the challenge is not to fall down that pathway of reinforcing bad choices, which limit our range of vision and therefore limit our decision-making. And we get into a rut where we can't see a way out of that, where we don't even want to see a way out of it. So that's how our tradition speaks to this notion of hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Next. Oh, Victor, we have the willpower to choose right and wrong. When did Moses wrong and killed one of the Pharaoh's soldiers? Why did God still speak to him through the bush? That's a really great question. Victor, I think that one of the wisest and most enlightening aspects of the Bible is that it depicts human behavior and human experience in very raw and very real ways. So war is not, it is not sugar-coated. And human conduct in the midst of slavery is not sugar-coated. It is brutally reflected. In fact, when it, at the beginning of the book of Exodus, when it talks about how the Jews are brutalized, the word brutal in 2 verses is mentioned, I think, 5 times, right? So this moment where Pharaoh, where Moses sees an Egyptian taskmaster brutalizing an innocent Israelite slave, that awakens a consciousness in Moses that he didn't know existed, a sense of connection and responsibility to that Israelite slave. And he acts. Now, once he acts and once he murders, he knows that he's in danger. And so he flees and he hides. So what we see in those moments is real humanity. We see all of it. We see an act of courage, rising up to defend the defenseless on the one hand. And then we see in the aftermath, fleeing and hiding. And then thereafter, we see a recognition, as if the burning bush awakens in Moses the sense of obligation that was always there, but that he tried to bury, but he just couldn't bury anymore. So what we're seeing is a real human being. You know, Moses is not elevated to a god. He's a person. And so he's a person who does some things that we admire, and there are other moments where he acts out of weakness. We see it all. And that is the glory of it. That's what makes Moses's, I think, his role as the greatest teacher and leader of the Jewish people, the Israelites. That's what makes it so fantastic. He's a real human being who was able to accomplish this. He was a person who was able to accomplish this. And we can identify with him. We can identify with those moments of courage, knowing that we should have them too. And we can certainly identify with those moments of weakness as well. Great. Any other questions? So I guess the final thing I would say is that if Pastor Lewis of blessed memory were here, I know he would challenge me. And I remember in the last conversation that we had at the church, we ended on a discussion of the devil and sin and hell. And I know, I'm just channeling Pastor Lewis now. I know he would ask me a whole lot more questions about this notion of hardening Pharaoh's heart. And I know we would have a wonderful discussion about the active role of God in this story, and that balance between human action and divine action in this story. I also know there would be there'd be a whole lot of laughter between the two of us too, and hopefully among you as well. And I guess the final thing I would say is that I do hope and pray that the next time we're able to learn scripture together, that we're able to do it in person. And so I'm just going to say, God willing, soon and in our days, our two communities will be able to come together and learn together and share fellowship together, as we have done so many times in the past. And just to say to all of you, thank you. I'm honored that you invited me. And I share the love of my community, Temple Sinai, with Friendship Baptist Church and all of our friends there. And so thanks for having me, everyone.